Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back. It's always lovely to connect with you. I can tell you right now that you are in for an amazing treat today. I'm here with Melody LeBaron, or if we're in France, we say LeBaron. Okay, so I like to give people the full vibration of their name. And I met Melody some years ago. We both signed up for a 10-day, ironically, a transformational retreat. And we're going to be talking a little bit with her today about transformation, but not in the traditional sense, how we transform loss. We're going to be talking about the death process. And, you know, it's because of COVID-19, this is really at the forefront of so many people's minds with the death that is surrounding us. People feel differently about this topic, but one thing's for sure, and I think Melody will agree, I'm going to turn it over to her momentarily, we all have this in common. We are all going to cross over, and how we feel about that as we go through our lives really sets the stage for how we cross over. So I want to share just a little bit about this fantastic lady and her background. Again, we met at an amazing retreat. I was blown away in California when I met her, just her full body of work, her presence, her expertise. She is a Feng Shui expert. She's a professional organizer. And for the last, I believe it's over 30 years, she has also supported people in the area of creating sacred space for a conscious and beautiful death. She is the author of an amazing book, Transforming Death, Creating Sacred Space for Dying. So we're talking about, you know, top of the top here. So Melody, welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm deeply honored that you make time. I know you're talking to so many people. You do this all over the world. So it's fantastic to have you on this platform. I'd love it if you could share with the audience how the topic of grief and loss, how you ventured into this territory, and just share with us a little bit how you incorporate this into your platform and what you do.
Well, actually, if you had asked me when I was 34 if I was interested in working with the dying, I would have probably said not at all. But as I turned 35, it became clear to my siblings and my dad that my mother was out of remission. She'd had cancer, and she lived for 13 years. She had a full 16 years with cancer, but she lived for 13 years after the doctors told her that she had 6 months to live. So we really were a blessed family. They did find some things to help her, but it was clear to me as I turned 35 that my mom didn't have long, and she was in complete denial.
Okay.
And so I'm the kind of person that if I'm going through a hard time, I want to learn everything about what's ahead. So I'm the mom who, when I was pregnant with my first, like I read all the parenting books if there were available. Well, when my mom was dying, I went to the bookstore and there was one book. It was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying. And I read that, and it was great, but I needed more. And luckily, a woman I knew at church happened to also be the first female funeral director in the state of Tennessee where I lived. And she took me under her wing, and she gave me some education, and that allowed me to prepare myself to work through the obstacles that I think are in the collective consciousness. We are a death-phobic culture, which means we have obstacles in our consciousness to really being present for death and for the dying. And so I got to work through those so that I could be fully present for my mom. She actually died in my arms. Some of my siblings and my dad were also there. And I was blessed to have a full shared death experience with her. And I have since then, in the last 30 years, midwifed the deaths of 13 of my closest loved ones, my dad,
Mm.
my son, my sister, many of my best friends, my former beloved,
Wow.
and I've been blessed to have 7 shared death experiences. So along the way in my career, yes, I do space clearing to clear the energetic imprint. Yes, I can organize and help set up a functional, optimal environment. Yes, I can feng shui, which is a deep way of partnering with the space. But for me, this work that I do with the dying and their caregivers, it's the most sacred work. It's my heart's, I love working because the moments of birth and the moments of death, these moments change us forever. If you're in the room when a baby is being born or when someone you love is dying, you're changed forever. Your consciousness will never be the same. And so these are pivotal moments. Now, if you think about other pivotal moments, Sheila, if you think about um, getting married, bringing a baby home, if you think about a graduation celebration, we often will decorate a space. We often will
Yeah,
bring in flowers. We'll bring in items that denote and confer honor on the transition that's happening. But we don't really think about creating a sacred space for this most profound transition that's going to affect everyone in the room, everyone in the circle. Even if you're not actually in the room with your beloved, um, you're going to, your life is going to be different after that.
absolutely. There's so many mixed feelings around death. I've sat with people who I don't want to deal with this at all. It's
Right.
it's complete denial
Right.
instantly. I have talked to people who are very much, it's almost, it wouldn't be a stretch to say they are embracing the experience, preparing for it. On another extreme, I've sat with people, my early work was in hospice. That was my first work 25
Oh,
years ago.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I've sat with people who've been giddy. You know, I'm ready for this. So
Right.
my
Right.
question for you is, why do you think this is something that universally we all have this in common? Why is there so much kind of closeted, let me turn away from this, I don't want to look at this? Why is that still so prolific? Uh, Even today, and COVID-19 is putting this squarely in our faces. You can't really turn away from it.
Right, right. Well, I think the answer, the honest answer to your question, Sheila, goes kind of deep, and we really have to explore sort of the origins of the Western paradigm. We live in Western civilization, right? Which is really, if we're going to be really honest, Western civilization is based on white supremacy. Western civilization
Whole
is
another video, but keep going. I'll
right.
have you back again.
I mean, when we think about this, Western civilization is based on a one-up, one-down paradigm, right? That the masculine way of being in the world is better than what we call the feminine way of being in the world. Now, Sheila, let me ask you, have you ever heard the phrase "from cradle to grave"?
Yes,
Well, do you have any idea where that phrase was coined?
I've said it so many times, but the origins, no. Please
Okay.
Fill me in.
Okay, so you'll be maybe surprised when you learn that that phrase from cradle to grave was coined by a group of white men who gathered in the late 1890s in the United States to form the new AMA, American Medical Association. And their stated goal was to run the midwives out of business.
Wow.
Yes, they wanted to co-opt every experience from birth to death, from cradle to grave, and bring it under the auspices of the way they thought
Wow.
our health should be managed.
Wow.
So let's just think about this. Since that time, because we used to take care of our own dying, right? The midwife would be called in not just for the birthing, not just for the laboring mothers and the nervous fathers, but the midwife would be called in when someone in the community was dying. And they would help create that sacred space. They would help ease the pain. That midwife would work with the family and help them express their anticipatory grief and be more fully present for the dying person, right? So let's look at, because when my mother was dying, I
Mm.
recognized that when I walked into the room, I lived 6 hours away from her. So I was coming in the beginning, once a month, and in the end, more often. I was leaving my children to come and take care of my mother. And I would walk into the room and I would see her on the bed, and my whole gut, my whole body would clench as I accommodated, as I felt, as I saw what the cancer had done in the time that had elapsed. You know, she had tumors in her liver, and her abdomen was enlarged and her skin was yellow. And, you know, we're going to have these physical responses. Like, our bodies are hardwired to avoid death. And when we love someone and we see death taking them, we're hardwired to react to that. But I would breathe through my body's response, but there were other things in the way of being fully present. And the first one that I had to come into relationship with and really examine, and I think you heard me speak about this at that retreat 4 years ago, is the society believes, and I think this comes directly from the paradigm that the AMA set up, that death is a failure of the medical system to heroically save the patient. Of course, now in the last 10 years, we have palliative care, we have hospice. That's changing the paradigm. But we come in this culture from the paradigm that death is a failure, not a natural part of the cycle of life. And I had to deal with that on another spiritual level, because in the church that we belong to, there was such an emphasis on healing through prayer
Yeah.
that death was considered a failure of your ability to pray or intent.
Yeah, it's an absolutely stunning and really spot on assessment. This pairing of passing on, death being so linked with failure, and
Right.
it's an aha moment and really explains a lot. I also feel that we have abandoned on so many levels the sacred space, not just of death, but of transition, whether it be a divorce, whether it be the loss of a child, a birth, or what have you. It's things move so quickly that we're in one spot, then we're in another, and we don't realize what happened. And then the trauma comes back. And why am I feeling this way 6 years later, 2 years later? Because this is the time you have to catch your breath. And in my opinion, trauma is recorded on a cellular level as well.
Right.
So there's a lot of fallout.
And in addition to our own bodies, we inherit from our parents' DNA the
Absolutely.
trauma of our ancestors. So you can't listen to the news and hear about Ahmed and Breonna and George Floyd without that activating trauma in the collective.
activation of trauma in the collective. My question for you is, because of the physical mechanics and how things are being structured, people are, the social distancing, my loved one is in the hospital, I can't be close to them, I want to create this space. Is it possible to create sacred energy and sacred space and sacred ritual around COVID-19 loss that is happening so fast? And if it is, what are some ideas on how to do this?
This is an important question for our time, Sheila. It's a really important question for our time. And what I will say is I've experienced sudden loss. My then 17-year-old son, Logan, who would be 40 a few weeks ago, would have been 40 a few weeks ago, was taken very suddenly. There was a car accident. He was a passenger. The driver went off the road, hit the utility pole, which came down on top of my son. I got a call, your son's in the emergency room. We had 3 days before he died. We had 3 blessed days to accommodate. Like I wasn't the mother who got the call, your son is dead. I learned a year later from the paramedics that Logan was actually dead when they arrived and they revived him. But we had those 3 blessed days to accommodate what was happening. And many people who their loved ones get taken out of their house to the emergency room and they never get to see them again. They've had this sudden loss. And the first thing I would say, the most important ingredient is to apply compassion.
Okay.
Apply compassion to yourself. You're going to have all kinds of emotions ranging from anger at what's happened to grief, to guilt, to all survivor's guilt, all kinds of things. And to apply compassion to the process. When you apply compassion, normally when we're in pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, when we're in pain, there's an instinctive sort of mechanism of resisting that pain, of pushing against it. And I have had some physical pain in my life, and I learned that when I'm in pain and I resist, I amplify the pain.
Okay.
So it's the same is true with this kind of emotional loss. So work to not, like do everything you can to take down this resistance that you'll have, and hold the space of compassion. Riding the waves of the grief is a really good thing. And then finding people who can guide you through the process. I've had so much grief facilitation training. I now consider myself a grief guide for people. And if people want to learn more about what I offer, they can go to my website, transformingspace.com, and there's a whole page on different ways of supporting loss and grief and death. And so let's say your loved one is away from you. Let's say your loved one has been taken to the ER. You can't be present. And how do you participate? If it wasn't COVID-19, you would be there with them.
Yeah.
How do you participate? Well, in 2012, when my dad was dying, my stepmom had some severe emotional problems. She was borderline. And she had allowed us, my siblings and I, to go and visit. I think that visit was 9 months before he died. And during that visit, we discovered that she was abusing him. And we set a boundary with her.
Wow.
And we called in support. We called in hospice. We called in caregivers. And we let her know the abuse had to stop. Well, from that moment, she would not let any of us enter the house again. So here's my dad dying, and I can't be there like I was with my mother. I was heartbroken. And And so I was in the inquiry. I was in the praying, asking questions like, how can I support my dad? And one night I came fully awake, feeling my mother and someone else in the room with me. And I just have to backtrack and tell you that when my mom was dying, I asked her, I said, Mom, if you're able to, after you die, will you just let me know you're okay? And she smiled and she said yes, and then she fell back to sleep. I sat there thinking about it and I thought, well, how am I going to know it's her? So when she woke up, I said, so Mom, should we organize like a sign between us? Like, how am I going to know it's like, do you want to shut the door, slam the cupboard? Like, how am I going to know it's you? And she laughed and she said, honey, it's going to feel the way it feels when I hug you.
Yeah.
And it does. So I could feel my mother's presence. And then I realized, oh, this is my grandma with her. This is my dad's mom. And
Yes.
they were there to show me and teach me how to set up an energy grid around him, in his room, around his bed, how to set up an energy grid of loved ones. They were there to show me the people on the other side of the veil who'd already died, who he completely loved and trusted. And they asked me to choose some people who were still in the third dimension. And once every one of them had said yes, I knelt in prayer and energetically called us all in to the space around him. Now, um, I knew that what was going to, uh, I knew that this was going to be some kind of way to support his dying process. But after I called them all in and visualized all of us holding hands around his bed, and so I was instructed to put his mother at his head and my mother at his feet, and
Yes.
then intersperse the living and the departed around him. And as we all assembled, as we all came in and held hands, in addition to it feeling like there was this circle around him, it almost formed like an energetic sphere. And
Yeah.
I could see that the streams of love flowing to my dad from those of us in 3D were all about how loved he was, and how we were supporting him in letting go of his identity and
Yeah.
letting and moving into the next dimension,
Yes.
while those of the circle who were already departed were streaming information to my dad about how easy it can be to let go of the body and move into the world of light. So for the next 6 months, we held the space. And and I was the last person to speak with my dad. My stepmother had shared with me in that visit 9 months before his passing that she had been in the room when her mother died and found it a horrible, frightening experience. Like she was just repulsed by it, which made me so sad that she was unable to get past her belief that death is the opposite of life,
Yes.
rather than serving the purpose of life, which we as humans can't really fully understand.
It really goes full circle to, what we opened up with, the various levels, people that are at such different places, inside of this topic. And I got chills as you were sharing, and I thank you for taking us inside your sacred space, and sharing about your love for your son and the loss. And it really just fell on my heart to share with you what a beautiful tribute. I talk to my clients a lot about living memorials. How beautiful that you have
Yes.
honored your child and honored your family with such a beautiful body of work that bridges, in my opinion, it just very elegantly bridges um, this world with the near beyond, is what I say. So I think it's just beautiful. And I have to say, it just leads me into my next question for you. There can be a lot of judgment of, and some of that is silent judgment. Sometimes people will judge out loud of how people move through their grief process. I lost my sister to stage 4 breast cancer about 6 years ago. And I had a moment with someone who felt that I should really be kind of in a fetal position. They didn't agree. I decided to provide her with a living memorial of joy and a celebration of life. My sister loved flowers. She loved beautiful clothing. I also personally feel that when heavy grief is heavy grief, and there's time we all have to do it our own way. But I also feel that when we are so sad and stop living and stop breathing and stop eating, my feeling is it does tie our loved ones to us in a certain way of worry. And I wanted to liberate her in joy. And I felt the best way I could do that is literally, she died, and less than 30 days later, my daughter was born. I was in this
Wow, birth and death.
they were right next to each other. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I believe in my heart. And I had a couple weeks with her before she passed on, that she wants me to be happy.
right,
So
exactly.
I honored that loss, and I celebrated life in the way that felt right for me. But
Right,
again, I did experience
right.
people, someone's
Well,
judgment. So what do you have to offer about that?
yeah, I remember after my son died, and of course, it's your hardest loss when you lose a child. When you lose a parent, you lose your past. When you lose your siblings, you lose the present.
Yeah.
They're holding you in your identity. But when you lose a child, you're losing a part of your future.
Yes.
And and I met a woman who I knew well, from years of attending the same church. I met her in the ladies' room once after Logan had died. And as we were at the sink washing our hands, she said to me, I have a daughter who died. And I said, oh, I never knew that. And she said, well, she was using drugs. It was all for the best. And in that moment, I felt, not just saw and heard, but I felt she was a very stiff woman. And I recognized in that moment her unintegrated grief.
Okay.
She was wearing it like body armor, right? She carried herself in such a way that almost repulsed others. And in that moment when she shared, I had a daughter who died at 21, and a little bit of that story. And I recognized when we go through a loss, it's going to hit us where we are in our emotional development, right? When my son Logan died, my youngest daughter was 4. Logan was her favorite sibling. So we took her to the Center for Grieving Children, and they said, when we experience a loss at a certain stage of our development, we're going to have to reintegrate that loss at every stage of our development if we will. If we are resourced, if we have enough resource to let ourselves feel the painful experience. And when we do, my own life has taught me that when we do, grief has medicine for us. Grief allows us to hold a more compassionate space for ourselves and for others. Later, when I went to the Compassionate Friends group, I met parents who'd lost their children 13 and 20 years earlier that were still in a place of anger at the circumstances, that were still in a place of heavy darkness. And like you, I thought, does this honor, if I continue to hold my grief for Logan? Yes, I was angry, but does this honor Logan if I continue, if I don't integrate this anger, if I don't integrate this horrible loss? So I got, you know, they say, you've heard the quote that when the student is ready,
Yeah.
the teacher will appear. Well, I was ready. And I had so many teachers, so many loved ones, so many, I call some of these people my spiritual and emotional fathers and mothers, because they embodied a skill set that my biological parents didn't have,
Yes.
weren't able to impart to me, weren't able to embody themselves. So I am so grateful. On Mother's Day, on Father's Day, I still honor those teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I let me ask you this, and definitely I already I'm already inviting you back for a part two at some road, because I could go on and on. I in my spirit, in my heart, it's been my experience that we do have a say so. We need to grieve how we grieve, but I got to a point after my sister passed. I was grieving in my own way, but I felt myself through my own self-determination pull up and say, it's really time now, in a robust way, to move forward powerfully with life. But I had the experience of feeling my will joined with the hand of God pull that up and pulled me out of that, the fine, you know, that the final throes, and like, go on, girl, we got to finish. And I said to someone, this was the second time I was judged, how are you doing with your loss? I said, I don't consider that my sister is dead. And I was looked at like I had six heads. And I tried to explain, but they didn't get it. I understand that physically she's not here, but I very much, from the spiritual perspective, I walk with her. I walk with my grandmother. But it's not just words. I feel that, you
Right.
know. So my last question for you is, where are we in all of this? Do you feel we have the will and to really shape this, so we don't have to like feel like a Mack truck has hit us? What's your thoughts in that arena? Personal empowerment.
Right. So again, this takes me back to that you know, we live in the Western world. We live in the white supremacy paradigm. And in the Western world, for us, when we think about time, time is linear, right? The past may be behind us or on that end, and the future's on the other, future's in front of us. Like, it's linear. But for all of the indigenous teachers and friends I've experienced, they don't believe that. For them, time is circular.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, you know, when I work with my clients, very often, if there's something unintegrated from the past, we sit in circle, we sit in sacred circle with
Okay.
all the aspects of themselves from birth to death, sitting in this circle. And they're at a particular moment, but we can, and then into that circle can come the higher realms, the divine life purpose blueprint can come, you know, and standing outside that circle is the spiritual support team, the guardian angel, the spirit guides, and
Yes.
all of the healed ancestors and
Yes.
departed loved ones.
Yes.
For
Yes.
me,
Yes.
there is, yes, we can't see them. I can't hug my son. My body still grieves that. But Sheila, like you with your sister, my son walks with me. My mother walks with me. I have a team.
And I literally mean walk. I mean,
Yes,
next to you. Yes. Yes.
yes,
You know, the world needs you right now, big time, in a way that perhaps no one ever realized. Um, how can people get in touch with you? How can they book the healing programs, the healing session, and turn the page. Give us very specific. I'll also put it on the video information, but what's the best way here? Because I think I need a package, you know, so how can they do that?
Okay, so if people go to my website, transformingloss.com or
Okay.
transformingspace.com, they will find a whole segment of 3 different offers around transforming their environment, from decluttering and organizing to feng shui to space clearing. If they're more interested in transforming self, they'll find personal clearing, coaching, and for women, the priestess process, which is a decolonializing, depatriarchalizing process. And then if they're going through a loss of any kind,
Okay.
they will find on the Transforming Loss page, they'll find how to get support if you're going through a loss, if you or someone you love is dying, and if you're a newly bereaved and you want a grief guide. So that's all there on my website, transformingspace.com.
Well, I think it's just fantastic. I've been on the site, but I'm going back on to take an extra look at those packages, because I feel that there's so many, and I do want to say to everyone, it's never too late. You may have had a loss
Oh,
10
yes.
years ago, 20 years ago, and you may want to come back and have some guided work in that area, or there may be a personal transition that you are grieving. It could be a circumstance that you're grieving the loss and you want to
How many people have lost their
right,
jobs
right.
because of
Exactly,
COVID-19? Yeah.
exactly. So I see that the implications are huge. It's huge. So we'll definitely I hope, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but
Oh, I would love to
yeah,
chat with you again,
I
Sheila.
hope you'll join me again, because I want to get into a conversation specifically about women and relationship transition and loss. That's a lot of
Absolutely.
my work centers around that, and I feel that you have some healing words and services for the population. So I'm so deeply honored that you made time. I appreciate it. And you guys, I'm telling you right now, this lady is the real deal. She is not just running her mouth. She lives it. She's walking her talk. She's in it, lives, eats, breathes, sleeps and stuff, and still makes time to lead a balanced life. So I encourage you, check her out with the information below. And I'm just so grateful for you. And I thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you, my dear.